In the past, it was a staple of kidnappings for the hostage to hold up a newspaper to prove that they're still alive. The problem with me is that I started reading the newspapers that I was holding up, although I'm still, as you can judge by our social media overlords, in captivity. Nevertheless, I'll try to get what news I can out to you given the constraints. First up, stories on the domestic news front that I'm tracking. The Daily Mail is reporting that Alzheimer's can be spread between humans. Pioneering study reveals at least 5 people have caught memory-robbing illness, as scientists warn hundreds more may be at risk. Alzheimer's can be spread between humans, a groundbreaking study revealed today. Experts have found evidence of at least 5 people catching the memory-robbing disorder from now-banned hormone treatments. The patients were among 1,848 people injected with growth hormones riddled with toxic amyloid beta protein seeds, or prions, as children. All 5 came down with the same rare early onset form of the devastating dementia condition. Others who received the same treatment are now considered at risk. Between 1958 and 1985, abnormally short children in the UK and US were given hormones harvested from cadavers to help spur their growth. The technique was then banned, and doctors instead used synthetic hormones after it emerged that some batches were contaminated with prions that led to a fatal and incurable brain disorder called Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, CJD. CJD itself is closely related to mad cow disease. Academics now believe other medical and surgical procedures might carry a risk of spreading Alzheimer's, as prions, which accumulate in the brain and kill neurons, can survive hospital sterilization methods. If true, this is very disturbing. The fact that it might be contagious. We have to be very skeptical, however, and remember that the attribution may not be absolutely accurate, and they may be covering for something else causing the neuronal collapse of people, which is odd because Elon Musk is in the news today reporting that his Neuralink has been helping to generate neurons in people. But these kind of claims, just as with the other ones, take with a grain of salt, and we will lead from that into international news. In the news recently are attempts to gin up conflict in the Middle East, especially with Iran. We're told that Iran-backed drone strikes against U.S. troops killed 3 soldiers in Jordan, although conflicting reports are emerging about whether the drone strikes happened in Jordan or in Syria. See here.
What about these contradictory reports about where the recent attack hit the American base, the so-called Tower 22 base? The US is saying it was their Jordan outpost, the Tower 22, while a man in an Iraqi resistance group stated it was in Syria. Why is there a contradiction here?
Well, the Jordanian government has not confirmed American claims, and they say that no target was struck within Jordanian territory. I think the Americans want to save themselves from the embarrassment that they occupy 1/3 of Syria. And people will ask, well, why are your troops there? Why are you sending troops to illegally occupy Syria and then get killed there? The reason is clear. The Americans are doing it to make life terrible for Syrians. They're doing it to disrupt trade between Syria and Iraq. They're doing it to help ISIS, because ISIS is in Al-Tanf. The Americans are training them. These terrorists carry out attacks on Syrian government troops and then go back into the territory held by the Americans. It is rather strange that ISIS does not attack American positions, but they murder Syrian Arab army soldiers. So that would be very embarrassing for the Americans to say. So obviously it's more convenient for them to say they're in Jordan and they have nothing to do with what's going on in Syria.
More than the superficial out-of-context events that are happening, I was struck by some of the deeper layer stuff when Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said something cryptic.
I would argue that we have not seen a situation as dangerous as the one we're facing now across the region since at least 1973.
He mentioned 1973. I noticed last October when the current hostilities erupted in Israel that it was a repetition of what happened almost 50 years to the day back in 1973 with the Yom Kippur War. That conflict led to a strangling off of oil supplies from OPEC and the plunging of the world into stagflation and then recession. It seems like, in some strange way, they're trying to recreate the variables of 1973 and to stage some situations in order to get similar results. Curious, I went to a chat bot and asked for milestones from 1973. It gave me this. 1. Oil crisis, 1973 to 1974. The Arab-Israeli Yom Kippur War in October 1973 triggered an oil embargo by OPEC. organizations of the petroleum exporting countries, against countries perceived as supporting Israel. This led to a quadrupling of oil prices and contributed to a global economic downturn. The oil crisis highlighted the vulnerability of the world economy to fluctuations in energy prices, leading to increased efforts to diversify energy sources and enhance energy efficiency. 2. Bretton Woods system collapse. In 1971, Richard Nixon took the United States off the gold standard, abandoning the fixed exchange rate system established at the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944. This move, known as the Nixon shock, allowed currencies to float against each other. It marked the end of the Bretton Woods system and had profound implications for global monetary relations, contributing to increased exchange rate volatility and shaping the modern international monetary system. 3. Formation of the European Union. The enlargement of the European Economic Community in 1973, with the accession of the United Kingdom, Denmark, and Ireland, contributed to the economic integration of European countries. The subsequent development of the European Union as a single market and a monetary union with the introduction of the euro in 1999 has had long-term economic consequences, influencing trade, investment, and economic policy across member states. 4. Rise of multinational corporations. The 1970s saw the continued rise of multinational corporations, with companies expanding their operations globally. This trend has continued over the decades, with multinational corporations playing a significant role in the global economy. The interconnectedness of businesses across borders has increased, influencing trade patterns, supply chains, and global economic dynamics. One of the bullet points was about, of course, the collapse of the Bretton Woods system and the removal of the gold standard as a peg for the dollar and all international currencies. And it's almost as if they want to trigger similar situational resonance. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, as Mark Twain said. So they're trying to rhyme the events of that time period to usher in probably CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. We have to remember that historically, money evolved in certain ways. For instance, in Lydia, which was a Greek city-state in Anatolia, that's the first time that they had coins, right? Gold coins became, the standard for monetary practice. And then China in the Middle Ages invented paper money. And now it seems like in a third iteration, they want digital. So aside from the creation of the World Trade Organization and the EU and the cell phone from the same year, another interesting thing happened at the time period. Technology was making workers more productive. In fact, they became 4 times more productive. Historically, higher productivity tracked with higher pay. The more you work, the more you got, in terms of salary. This was true all the way up until that time period, as you can see here. Then something happened. They stopped paying people more for more productivity, and that extra money was siphoned away from workers and went up to the shareholder class. And by this method, an estimated $50 trillion was channeled away from the working class to the oligarch class, as Charles Hughes Smith points out here. Why people were more productive was because of the aforementioned cell phone, the introduction of the relational database, fax machines, later on email, and so forth. A new technology that's shaking things up now is AI, and it's slated to create even more productivity gains, but there are forces who are intent on making that cash not go to you, but to them. So it'll be used to fund a whole new system like what happened in 1973. That $50 trillion, by the way, was used to build out the global grid. So people will show memes of, kind of like Taiwan in 1990, and there's just salt flats. And then they're like Taiwan today, and it looks like Manhattan with all this infrastructure, all these buildings, these high rises, new ports, new rail, new roads. Well, it was the American taxpayer who paid for that. That $50 trillion that was siphoned away from your paycheck was used to build that global supply chain. And it looks like they're going to be using the money that's going to be generated from AI to build, similar economic and globalist governance structures. So it's going to be a boon to them. And you may find it weird, but that's okay because it leads us into the news of the weird. Speaking of AI, the Daily Star reports, humans will soon be worshipping AI chatbots as gods, experts warn. Humans could soon be worshipping artificial intelligence as if it is God, according to boffins. Experts believe people might ditch traditional religion for tech-based beliefs. They warn the responses of bots such as ChatGPT were luring people to seek higher meaning from them. Lars Holmquist, a professor of design and innovation at Nottingham Trent University, said, "The results of generative AI are very open for interpretation, so people can read anything into them. Psychologists have historically proven that humans interpret their interactions with computers like real social relationships." So it's very possible that people are using AI to find meaning and guidance, much like from religious scriptures, even though there may be no actual meaning there. There have also been examples of people interpreting AI chatbots as being conscious, which they most definitely are not, which raises very interesting theological issues for those who believe humans are a unique creation. This is part and parcel of what we were talking about before. Just as they're going to be planning on creating new economic systems, new globalist governance structures, there are pressures from various quarters in that community to create a new world religion. And a lot of those people are talking about basing it on tech. There are people who are worried as well that there may be kind of interdimensionals circling us with AI because these beings are kind of made of what we think of as electricity, and they are the ghost in the machine. And they're quietly getting us off of analog, right? Like we used to have analog clocks. We used to have analog television sets. Television started as analog. We used to have analog cars, which they're trying to get us off of, and they want everything to be electric because these the ghosts in the machine, as I called them, have more control over us, and they'll be able to manipulate us. There was a gentleman named Jason Reza Georgiani, and he's an open Luciferian, and he was talking about how Lucifer is a great, kind of technology bringer. He brought writing and fire and enlightenment, all this kind of stuff, like in the Garden of Eden, right? The serpent appeals to Eve by saying, oh, I'm going to give you knowledge, kind of like Elon Musk with the Neuralink implants in the brain. And so Georgiani says that there were three great rebellions in human history. The first was in the Garden of Eden. The second was at the Tower of Babel. And he said the third great rebellion against God is going to be the singularity, is going to be tech and AI, and he proposes a new kind of Luciferian God that's based on technology. He will bring us technology, and we should worship materialism and machines and stuff like that. And currently there's a gentleman, a translator at the Vatican, and his name is Mauro Bilino, and he's kind of setting up the call about that, like the Jesus, the second coming of Jesus will be presented to us as kind of, Jesus was a UFO, Jesus was an alien, and he's come back to give us tech. So perhaps this is why NASA has been quietly funding religious conferences.
There also is a lot of chatter from fundamentalist religious communities about what UFOs mean, or about what the potential for extraterrestrial life means. And it actually just tie in a little bit with what you mentioned there about the possibility of there being other dimensions, and that actually, in some way, shape or form, some of the UFO presence that we may or may not be seeing are things like demons or negative spirits, etc. I mean, do you buy into any of that?
I don't believe in demons myself, but a lot of people do. And certainly the Bible talks about these things in terms of unclean spirits. And there has been, is probably a faction still in both the US and the UK that thinks that some aspects of the UFO phenomenon are demonic. And one of their reasons for believing that is a passage in the book of Ephesians in the Bible that talks about Satan as being the prince of the power of the air. I think that it is undeniable that many of the world's great religions have in recent years started to think seriously and do some theological debate about what the consequences would be of discovering extraterrestrial life. We know that the Catholic Church, for example, has issued a number of statements on this. One of them said that there's no doctrinal objection to the existence of aliens because, as they put it, man may place no creative limits upon God. NASA has quietly put in a bit of funding to theological conferences that have talked about this, and in one sense, I don't know that it's because any of the great religions of the world know this to be true. I think it's more a case that they're hedging their bets, and they're thinking, if it's true, they want to get ahead of the game this time and not get caught up in the sort of science versus religion dogfight that we saw in the Middle Ages, for example, with Copernicus and Galileo.
This gets back to what I was saying about how there are those who think that because we're going to be creating a whole new economic system, a whole new global governance structure, that it calls for a whole new religion. These people are welcoming the death of the old gods, the old culture, the old civilization. The subject of death, of course, leads us into our obituary section. It's an unusual obituary, given the fact that George Carlin died in 2008. His daughter, Kelly Carlin McCall, is suing the creators of an hour-long AI-generated version of her father's image and voice for a digitally generated stand-up special called George Carlin, I'm Glad I'm Dead.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to start off with a heartfelt apology. I'm sorry it took me so long to come out with new material, but I do have a pretty good excuse. I was dead. So technically, it wasn't my fault. If you want to blame somebody, you're going to have to blame God. Which we all know is not going to happen. People are always thanking God for the good stuff in their lives, but somehow they conveniently forget that it's the same God who does all the bad too, and he does a lot of bad. You get a promotion, praise Jesus. You get fired, God is testing me. You meet your soulmate, God brought us together. Your soulmate dumps you, God is bringing me someone else. You survive a tornado, I'm so blessed. 20 other people do not. God wanted them in heaven. It's all bull. If he gets credit for the good stuff, then he's got to take the blame for the bad stuff too. You can't thank him for curing your cancer when he was the one that gave it to you in the first place. And don't forget, before he gave you cancer, he had to invent it. What kind of a sick dreams up cancer?
Note how the new AI-generated George Carlin is taking woke pot shots at the old religion, perhaps paving the way for a new religion that the elites have in mind. Just be mindful of the propaganda, even when it's being delivered by dead people. At any rate, thank you for watching the show, or as I like to call it, that suspicious gap in my resume. See you next time. Consider subscribing to my new podcast, Classic Paranormal. It's a clearinghouse for lost real-life accounts of true ghost stories. It's found on Apple Podcasts. Go there now if you're interested in enigmatic tales, chilling true accounts, chronicles from cases of the past that time has forgotten, but that the modern person who likes relaxing by a campfire swapping ghost stories might appreciate. As I said, the new podcast I'm launching is available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and there's a link in the description below on this video.